Hello and welcome. You're watching the Global Reset on CNBC-TV18 Prime with me, Prashant Nair. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping have met in China for the first time since the Galwan clashes plunged relations into a crisis. The optics suggest a thaw. Talks of Panchsheel, renewed flights and even the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra. But the fundamental remains fraught. Indian officials are clear. Border peace is the foundation for any real reset. This outreach comes against the backdrop of US tariffs on Indian exports and rising pressure on the energy trade with Russia. For New Delhi, the meeting was as much about hedging global bets as it was about mending fences with China. Is this a turning point for India-China ties or a symbolic embrace masking unresolved mistrust? Joining me today are Swaran Singh, who is a professor, School of International Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University, JNU. And we have Yukteshwar Kumar, who is an India-China relations expert and an academic. I'm going to bring both of you in just a bit from now. But before I go any further, let me quickly recap what has happened with regards to the meeting in China. PM Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping met for nearly an hour in Tianjin on the sidelines of the SCO summit, marking Prime Minister Modi's first visit to China in 7 years and signaling a diplomatic thaw after years of high tension. Both leaders acknowledged recent peace and stability along the contested Himalayan border, referencing disengagement steps and an agreement on border management, but they did not specify further military moves. The leaders stressed that India and China are partners, not rivals, and agreed differences must not escalate into disputes, reflecting a shared desire to move past recent hostilities. Prime Minister Modi called for stronger economic ties, highlighting India and China's collective role stabilizing the global order amid US trade volatility, especially following the recent 50% tariffs imposed on Indian exports. The timing, just days after US tariffs and against the backdrop of US-China trade tensions, was interpreted as both leaders seeking strategic autonomy and signaling unity within the global South. Discussions touched on development pathways and the need to expand convergence in regional and global forums. Both leaders welcomed, and I quote, positive momentum in ties since their last meeting in Kazan, that is late 2024. Prime Minister Modi pledged to advance relations based on mutual trust, respect and sensitivity, while President Xi urged that border issues not overshadow economic cooperation. Agreements included resuming the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra and direct flights between both countries, a symbolic gesture boosting confidence and people-to-people ties. Prime Minister Modi formally invited Xi to the BRICS summit India will host in 2026, underlining India's intent to play a pivotal role in multilateral forums. Both sides recognize the need for stable India-China relations for the wider Asian century and a multipolar world, crucial for global markets and supply chains. Prime Minister Modi also met Russian President Putin, also in Tianjin during the SCO summit, focusing discussion on energy, strategy, autonomy and defense ties amid global polarization. Both leaders reaffirmed a commitment to resilient trade flows with special emphasis on oil, fertilizer and defense equipment as well. Both signaled the intent to insulate their partnership from disruptions caused by Western sanctions and tariff escalations. The dialogue included brief references to broader multilateral frameworks, with Russia welcoming India's continued engagement at the UN, BRICS and Eurasian forums. Well, that's essentially what has happened over the weekend. Meetings between Indian leaders and, of course, the Indian and Russian leader as well. Let's just take this forward. As I said, Swaran Singh is a professor, School of International Studies at JNU, and Dr. Yukteshwar Kumar is a Sinologist at the University of Bath in the UK. Gentlemen, great to have both of you here. Thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Singh, if I can start with you, sir, how do you view what we've seen so far? Would you go so far to say that this is tactical, strategic, or this is more durable, a reset in relations?
This is definitely strategic, but whether it is a reset, that would be perhaps a little optimistic assessment of what has happened. And because it's an incremental and a very large U-turn, if you want to describe it in that sense of how since October, both China and India, especially at the level of their national leaders, have not just come to an understanding, but also projected that understanding of felt need to normalize a relationship and address their irritations or challenges or problems amicably by dialogue. But lots of these initiatives are still in the process. So this is going to take certain amount of time to fructify. So maybe potentially it could perhaps become a reset in the relationship because there are serious issues that still continue to be there. For example, the most recent example of the real-time inputs that China was providing to Pakistan in May during the military confrontation between India and Pakistan. Or Pakistan is a very special ally. They are just expanding the China-Pakistan economic corridor to include Afghanistan and take it all the way to Afghanistan and Tajikistan and so on. So there are issues which Prime Minister's speech also underlined in terms of no connectivity should be built by creating infringement on any nation's sovereignty. He mentioned whether we can have a double speak on terrorism. He also spoke of terror financing. So what I'm saying is, yes, on one side, there are several issues, like, for example, opening Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, opening border trade at Lipu Lake, Shipkila, Nathula, or restarting direct flights, or, thinking how we can start hydrological data exchanges again. So there are momentum. The difference fundamentally, as they engage each other, India's focus remains on line of actual control with the argument relations cannot be normal as long as borders are not normal. China, on the other hand, wants to emphasize on the bigger picture of India and China being two great civilizations. They can come together and address the global instability, which is triggered by the bully behavior or the coercion of President Trump. So they have slightly different trajectories in terms of what they are pursuing together. But these trajectories do overlap. And I think the most interesting news after June meeting of defense ministers of SCO, when Indian defense minister refused to sign, is a very clear mention in the Tianjin Declaration saying that member states strongly condemn the terrorist attack in Pahalgam on 22nd April and go as far as to express deepest sympathies and condolences to the families of the dead and wounded. I think that's a very clear mention of one of India's major concerns in Tianjin Declaration. So I think incrementally, yes, it's a positive momentum, and maybe to a certain extent, not wholly, to some extent, Trump's tariffs have contributed to China, India, Russia again coming together, India, China accelerating normalization of relations. Uh, but I think even there, the perception of the connection is much more than the reality of the connection of whether Trump tariffs are driving China and India to come together, because their normalization begins at least in October last year. So incremental positive change for me, definitely. And potentially this can perhaps become the reset in bilateral relations.
Yeah, I mean, step by step, right? And I think both sides will be wary in that sense. I mean, we must be, and I think, but it's a start in that sense, right? But for now, a direction has been set. We'll let us see how far this goes. Dr. Kumar, if I can come to you, sir, how do you view this? You're on mute, Dr.
Most,
Kumar. Sorry, yeah, can hear you. Go on.
yeah, I'm right now sitting in Tianjin in China, and one of the
Oh, wow.
most visually striking moments from this SCO summit meeting was that apart from the bilateral talks with President Xi Jinping yesterday, Prime Minister Modi, President Putin, and President Xi Jinping talking with each other like a close chap of childhood. Uh, it was not only a protocol, but they also had candid discussions, jokes, and a sense of camaraderie that formal meetings could not capture. Because I speak Chinese, and I could see that Xi Jinping was saying, "我们三个朋友," that we are three friends. And then all the three, they laughed, they erupted in laughter. And what was also striking was that the Pakistani Prime Minister was noticeably sidelined, almost invisible in the interactions. There is a classic example of Chinese proverb, Yuan Qiao, Qin Kung, befriend distant powers while keeping your immediate rivals in check. And that's what exactly India did. Next, the best photograph was President Putin and Prime Minister Modi traveling in the same car. It would have been obviously not possible, but just a joke that if the car would have been driven by Xi Jinping, that would have been just marvelous, and to show to the world that SCO, because it is not unlike NATO, is a military-based organization, or unlike European Union, which is primary goal is business, but it is about against terrorism. As we know that a few months ago, when Rajnath Singh was in Qingdao in China, he refused to sign the declaration. But today, because of the charisma of Modi, where he pursued that in the Tianjin Declaration, there must be a written statement about Pahalgam attack, about cross-border terrorism, and all these kind of things. So I feel that, as in Chinese we say, Jing Shui Shen Liu, the still water dripping and dripping that can run deep. And I do understand that these international politics are not 2020 or even one-day match. It could be, in the old days, 6 days of test match. It's a long game, but these quiet gestures, handshakes, and car ride conversations often reveal perhaps more than the official statements. From a geopolitical perspective, these small informal moments, they do matter. The laughter, the camaraderie, that's signaling the alignment, mutual understanding, and subtle messaging without a very single harsh word. It was diplomacy layered with strategy, and the sidelining of Pakistan sends a clear but tactful message. India's partnership and credibility are being recognized at a very higher level.
It's very well put. We're going to take a quick commercial break here. I have to do that. We will continue this conversation with both of you. So allow me to do that. Take that break. We are back and we continue this very interesting discussion. Stay tuned. Okay, welcome back. You're with us here on the Global Reset. We are in conversation with Swaran Singh, who is a professor, School of International Studies at JNU. And we have Yukteshwar Kumar, who's a sinologist at the University of Bath in the UK, though he is in Taijin, as he told us earlier on. Very interesting conversation here. If I can come to you, Mrs. Singh, you said you began by, you prefaced your first answer with Pakistan, right? How can, the border issues with China is one thing, but as you said, during Operation Sindhu, real-time intelligence was provided by China. How does one square that in the context of improving relations? I mean, how does that work? We already trade with China. We run a $100 billion deficit with China. I mean, India runs a deficit. China has a surplus. Although there have been restrictions. It's a big one, isn't it?
There is no doubt the answers to that unique relationship between an Islamic republic and a theocratic communist country have often defied easy explanations. unless one often sees that there are two fundamental reasons that Pakistan was neighboring country to the Xinjiang province, which is a Muslim majority province of China, which is also restive and there is often violence there. So historically, China wanted to befriend the neighboring Islamic country, not to get into further trouble. Second, of course, that close relationship with Pakistan also later grew into an anti-India axis because gradually from late 1950s we got into trouble with China. So that is a unique, more than half a century old relationship, and that's not going to disappear over a period of time. But gradually, there have been phases in that long period when China has showcased greater restraint in cultivating, engaging, indulging Pakistan, sort of being reduced uh, to engaging India over a period of time. For example, early 1990s, when the relationship with India opened up, couple of agreements, arrangements were made between India and China. Relevance of Pakistan became much lower. You remember Kargil war when Nawaz Sharif went to China to seek help. He had to cut short his visit because China refused to help him in Kargil war, and India's relation at that time with China during 1990s had changed. But again now, given the 5 years of tensions on the border, yes, we have seen again Pakistan and China relationship again getting much thicker. So it's again going to be, my approach is gradual process where India's engagement with China will grow stronger, and over a period of time, China's indulgences with all other neighbors of India, whether it is Pakistan on top of the list or even other countries like Maldives or Nepal or Bangladesh more recently, will get automatically, lose their shine or attraction for Beijing in that sense. And as far as trade is concerned, yes, that again defies understanding of most Western scholars. How can there be enormous tension on the border and their bilateral trade goes all the way to 136 billion period during that period? But that trade again, of course, is as you mentioned, virtually one-sided. China sends exports worth $113 billion last year, deficit $99 billion. On that, also two sides are trying to work hard to see if there is a way to deal with that formidable deficit. When Prime Minister Modi came to power, he had tried opening up to Chinese investments, allowing China's manufacturing in India, so that some of the imports could be reduced because they'll be manufactured locally with Indian inputs, could also strengthen India's manufacturing sector. That focus is in some sense returning again now,
Hmm.
where Make in India is becoming the kind of frame in which we want Chinese companies to collaborate with Indian companies and work together and produce here for
Mr.
India and for the world in
Yeah,
that sense. So it's a
yeah.
very, very painstaking, slow, piecemeal transition which is taking place.
Hmm.
But if India has to grow as the world's manufacturing hub, then China could be a potentially useful partner because Chinese did the same thing.
Yeah,
They had such a strong relationship with all the Western
yeah.
countries and companies who were producing in China. And that time people used to say, how can China produce for Western companies because they don't see eye to eye in terms
Yeah.
of
No,
politics.
Mr. Singh, if I can come to you, isn't there a fundamental conflict? I mean, China is the factory of the world, right? I mean, for 5 years now, this phrase in China plus one, I mean, China wouldn't be too happy ceding any position, right? But I think as over the last few years, I spoke with this gentleman from S&P Global. They put out a very interesting report about what China has done in what they call the global south, which is, I mean, Asia and Southeast Asia, outside of North America and Western Europe. And they say, they're very cognizant now of just dumping stuff made in China into other countries because, I mean, that attracts import duties and sort of other measures from around the world, countries across the world. So they make in those countries now by investing along with local partners. Is that the way to go here in India as well?
I think we are already on that path, which was briefly disrupted during the 5 years of border tensions.
Hmm.
At some stage, I remember in India, the most sold five top phones had four phones from China. Three of them were being manufactured in India. So that is the way which will suit both India and China. And as China, starts facing equal heat from United States, which is the main destination for its exports, it will find India extremely critical and relevant destination for its as I mentioned, $113 billion of exports last year. So there are areas where they will overlap and explore possibilities of working together. Except that India, again, as India has been, India will remain very cautious as to what are the sectors. For example, India is not likely to open ports, airports, telecommunications, and other sensitive sectors which have any implications of dual use and then defense relevance and national security issues. But on large number of other consumer products, I think collaborations can happen. And I think some of the Indian companies are already in conversation with, I think that Bharti Mittal is talking to Hire, as I read recently. Likewise, we are also making it easier for Chinese to send their not just technical staff, which we initially opened up visas for. Now we are opening up also for the managerial staff to come and work in India, because that is again China's main interest. I often say Belt and Road Initiative is a result of compulsions more than ambitions, because so many graduates coming out of universities in China need jobs, and China thinks that creating platforms, infrastructure abroad could be an opportunity for sending Chinese youth to work there. Their factories are producing enormous amount of products which need
Yeah.
to be also sent abroad. So in that sense, now Chinese are also shifting from just trade to investments over a period of time. And compared to investing in places like Cambodia or in Laos or in Sri Lanka, I think India definitely is a much bigger and much better option for Chinese. So they also would find India a very attractive partner in case India wants to open up joint production centers or factories in India that can help India as well in strengthening its own manufacturing sector, which is where the focus recently is, because we are already good in services sector. We need to strengthen manufacturing sector. And China coming together with India with all the caution, with all the
Yeah.
alertness that we don't get into trouble in any of these areas, I think is a possibility, and we are inching in that direction very clearly now.
You know, I wish I had more time. I'm completely out for now, but I hope both of you will come back on this program as we continue to track what happens between India and China. And I think this is, of course, just the beginning of it. Mr. Singh and Dr. Kumar, thanks both of you for being here. Appreciate it very much on CNBC Prime. You know, what we want to do next is just sort of, you know, as we wrap up this edition of the Global Reset, make you listen into what former RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan had to say on the, of course, trade tiff between India and the US, and of course, what's happening with China, and of course, also former US Trade Representative Michael Froman on the same topic. Listen in, take that quick commercial break. It's goodbye from me. More comes up on the other side.
I don't think it's serious. It's more a signal. I don't think that in the longer run, India would prefer China to the United States. In survey after survey, you find that Indians really like the United States. But I think the Indian leadership is basically saying, you know, make up your mind. Which way do you want to go? Because otherwise we can strengthen other alternatives. I don't think India gains a lot by buying Russian oil. Actually, before the war, it was accounting for about 2% of Indian purchases. India would be happy to go back to that. The discount on Russian oil is really quite small at this point. I think if the United States, you know, through a backdoor channel asked, please stop buying Russian oil, India would be pretty happy to do that.
This is Modi's first trip to China in 7 years, and it's a direct reaction to the fact that the U.S. imposed these tariffs. They don't feel they can rely on the United States as a strategic partner going forward, and they're exploring their other options, you know, with China and the other members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. India is a very proud country, and I think it is certainly sending the signal that it is not willing to be pushed around by the United States and not be treated as one of the worst economic partners of the United States, certainly. And so it's wondering why it's facing a 25% tariff because of the oil it's buying from Russia, where China, which buys more oil from Russia, is not facing such a tariff. And I think it is sending that signal. It is a signal to the U.S. and a very important domestic political signal for Modi that they are not going to be taken for granted by the United States going forward.